Well, we're returning to our discussion of ethics in the idealist tradition, the tradition that holds that everything is really dependent on the mind. And we're going to be looking at one of the oldest traditions that is still very much a vibrant tradition, holding that sort of position, both placing ethics at the center of philosophy and also maintaining an idealist stance that everything is mindful. That view is the view of Buddhism. And so we're going to begin by talking about the general shape of that religion and the philosophical underpinnings of it. The basic idea here is, well, Houston Smith puts it this way. There are really only two people in history who have prompted the reaction, not who are you, but what are you? And one of them is the Buddha. His answer is, I am awake. I am awake. The rest of you are sort of sleepwalking through life, but I am actually the awakened one, which is what the Buddha means. He was born in 563 and died in 483. He was somebody who, in other words, was a contemporary of Lao Tzu, of Confucius, of the very earliest Greek philosophers like Thales. Also lived around the time that the Hebrew scriptures were being put in more or less their contemporary form, at least many of them. And so this is a sort of key period in human history. Karl Jaspers referred to it as the Axial Period, meaning a period when there was a large amount of migration going on, when all over the world, great philosophies, great religions initially took shape. Well, here's the general idea of the Buddhist background. He was born as a prince in a palace, and very early in his life, his father, the king, received a sort of prediction from someone who was viewed as a wise man, who said that his son would become a great religious mendicant. That is to say, something like a monk, a great religious figure. And the king was not happy about this at all. He wanted his son to be his heir as king. And so what do you do when you find out that the person you had hoped to groom as the next king, in effect, wants to become a philosophy major and start a new religion? And so he said, well, all right, this is bad, right? What's going to prompt religious thoughts? Well, it's encountering difficulties in life. So he did his best to make sure that the young Buddha has never encountered anything unpleasant. And so in particular, he hid from him the idea that people get old. And so anybody who was old was not allowed to come into the presence of the young Buddha. And the same thing was true of disease. He wasn't allowed to see anyone who was sick. Similarly, death. The idea that people eventually die, even that animals die, was something carefully kept away from him. And then the last thing that his father, the king, wanted him to see was a monk or anything else that would prompt perhaps these religious thoughts and impulses. In any case, the Buddha was kept in the palace then, in this highly artificial environment for years. But finally, he convinced the person who was taking care of him to allow him to travel outside the palace. He essentially said, look, I've never been outside these walls. I have no idea what the world is like. How am I supposed to train to be king if I have no idea what the world is like? And so he began taking some rides in the area around the palace. Now the king had given orders that if this happened, all of these sites were to be kept from the Buddha. But as you might imagine, that's a very difficult thing to do. And so the story goes, eventually he did, as he was touring the neighboring countryside, see someone who was old. And it was the first time he had ever seen an old person. He was shocked. He saw at one point a sick person. And again, he was shocked. What? People aren't always in perfect health? He saw a corpse and actually came to encounter death for the first time. And then finally he saw a monk. He saw someone who was devoting their lives to religion. All of these sights disturbed the Buddha deeply. And so he, by this point, was married. He had a young son himself, but he decided to leave behind his wife and his young son and search for religious truth. So he left the palace and went on a quest for fulfillment. Now, he describes two paths here, and he says neither of these paths work. In the palace, he had followed a path of desire, a path of self-indulgence. Basically, anything he wanted, he was given. Anything unpleasant was kept away from him. And so he got everything he desired, and yet he said, was I fulfilled? No. In the end, I nevertheless thought, I need to understand the meaning of life. I need to leave the palace and actually understand the world, understand myself. And so he says the path of desire can produce many pleasures. It can be a delightful path in many ways. But in the end, does it really yield human fulfillment? Does it really give you what you ultimately want? And his answer is no, because ultimately it cannot give you a sense of meaning. Well, when he went off into the forest, he lived a life of extreme asceticism. It is said that after a time he ate only one bean a day to keep himself alive. The story goes he became so thin that he could put his hands around his waist and they would meet. I can't do that. But anyway, he found that wasn't fulfilling either. I mean, what happens when you go off into the forest and you meditate and for months you do nothing but eat one bean a day? What do you think you would experience? Hallucinations. He was really hungry. That wasn't very fun. Okay, and it's not just that it was fun, it didn't give meaning to life either. And so he says, well, wait a minute, this path of desire, that didn't lead to fulfillment, that didn't teach me anything about what it really meant to be alive. But the same thing was true of this path of renunciation, this path that depended on self-denial and asceticism. That didn't teach me anything about what life was all about. And so actually I didn't come to any understanding of anything as a result of either of those. But eventually, he was sitting underneath a Bodhi tree and he became enlightened. He suddenly felt as if he had woken up and understood the nature of the world and the nature of, well, you might say, life and what life is all about. He expressed it when he came back and preached what is called his first sermon. In the first sermon, he lays out the Four Noble Truths, the things that he takes as the foundation for his own ethical philosophy. And here they are. The first one is that life is suffering. Secondly, desire, craving, clinging is the cause of suffering. Third, nirvana extinguishes craving and hence suffering. And finally, the path to nirvana is the Eightfold Noble Path. Now, I want to talk about each of these in more detail, but I think it's important to understand the overall structure of this. Life is suffering. Life is badly out of joint. If you want to think of it this way, Hinduism thinks as its basic tenet that we can get what we want, that human nature and the nature of the world are aligned in such a way that it promotes our fulfillment. It may take multiple lifetimes to get there, but the world is structured in such a way that we can attain fulfillment. Buddhism says exactly the opposite. Our nature is really mismatched with the nature of the world. And so life is suffering for us. What is the cause of this suffering? Well, it's selfish desire. It is craving. It is what other traditions refer to as coveting. That's what leads to suffering. Well, that suggests there is a way to eliminate that suffering and to bring ourselves back into alignment with the world, namely to eliminate selfish desire, to eliminate coveting, craving. Now that state is called nirvana. And what is the path to that? How do we eliminate suffering by eliminating desire? The answer is by following the Eightfold Noble Path. So one way to look at this is that he is giving you a symptom. Life is suffering. Imagine going to the doctor. The doctor says, well, what's going on? You say, well, I've got this pain in my shoulder. Okay, that's the symptom, the pain. And indeed, here he sees pain as all over life. Life is badly out of joint. And then he says, well, all right, what's the cause of the pain in your shoulder? Maybe the doctor examines it and says, tendonitis or something like that. And so in this case, the Buddha is saying, well, all right, life is painful, life is suffering. What's the underlying cause of that? The answer is selfish desire. We want things, we crave things, we covet things, and that makes us suffer because we cannot always, in fact, often we cannot get what we want. Well, that suggests, now what's the prognosis, Doc? Can you do anything to help my shoulder? Well, in this case, yes, there is a way of helping this pain that you find in life, namely to eliminate that desire. And, well, how do I do it? Now, the doctor writes a prescription. And in this case, saying, follow the Eightfold Noble Path. Maybe for the shoulder, the doctor says, do certain exercises. Well, in this case, it's something like that. Yes, do the following 8 exercises. And those are going to be therapy that help you overcome the suffering that is there in life. So let's talk about each one of these noble truths in a little more detail. The first one, that life is suffering. The Pali term here, and Pali is the ancient language of Nepal, which is where the Buddha was from. It's closely related to Sanskrit, though it's not quite the same. Anyway, the term he uses is dukkha. This, amongst, is the noble truth of suffering. And that suffering does mean something like painful, out of joint. It's used to describe a dislocated joint. Anyway, here's what he says. Birth is suffering. Decay is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Notice some of the things that he had seen in his travels there, that he had been shielding from the palace. Being around what we hate is suffering. Being apart from what we love is suffering. Not to obtain what we desire is suffering. Briefly, clinging to existence is suffering. So all of these things are causes of suffering. Now I want you to think for a moment about the things that make you unhappy and see if he's given us a good list. What are things that make you unhappy, that make you suffer?
Watching the people you love do stupid things.
Watching the people you love do stupid things, okay. Yes, so it's not always just a matter of being apart from them. Sometimes it's being with them and seeing them do stupid and self-destructive things. Other examples of things that make you suffer, that make you unhappy. Yeah? Mosquito bites. Okay, good. As we're going to see, actually this is an example that's discussed by some Buddhists. What do you do if a mosquito lands on you and starts biting you? By the way, last night I had a dream that I forget the circumstances, but somehow my arm ended up just covered in mosquitoes. Oh, now! I didn't get it then, or even when I woke up, but now I know exactly why. Because yesterday I was doing a bunch of Pokemon raids in a place where there were a lot of mosquitoes, and one person was joking that the only thing that was keeping the mosquitoes from biting him is that they couldn't get through the crowd of other mosquitoes that were already biting him. And it was like that thought somehow got into my dream, and my arm was covered in mosquitoes. But yes, mosquitoes are things that cause suffering, right? And they make you itch, and they're unpleasant. Other things that make you unhappy. Yeah?
This morning I slipped and fell in the rain.
Oh, you slip and fall in the rain. Yes, okay, slipping and falling down. Physical pain is something that is, of course, something that you can't really avoid. And as you get older, let me tell you, it just keeps getting worse. Things start hurting that you never thought were even capable of hurting before. And so life is suffering. There's physical pain, there's emotional pain, there is annoyance, irritation. Now, a lot of things that involve suffering aren't really exactly painful, which is why it's hard to translate this term correctly. Things like the itch of a mosquito bite. That's really annoying. And some people are really annoying. I know all sorts of people who are actually really annoying to be around. And there are sounds that are annoying and so on. So there are lots of things that suggest that what you want the world to be and what the world is are out of joint with each other. They don't match up well. Now, what is the ultimate cause of this? Here's the diagnosis. He says, this, O monks, is the noble truth of the cause of suffering. This craving, which leads to rebirth, accompanied by pleasure and lust, finding its delight here and there. This craving is threefold, namely, craving for pleasure, craving for existence, craving for prosperity. So there are all sorts of things that we not only want, but we want desperately, we covet, we really desire in this way that causes suffering. We seek pleasure, and often we can't find it. We also crave, well, he says crave existence. In other words, we don't like the thought that we're eventually going to die. We don't like the thought that the people around us are going to die. We don't like suffering. We don't like illness. We would like to have a life that is free of all those things, and that's impossible. So we crave existence, even though we know that our future involves death. We crave pleasure, even though we know that quite frequently we cannot achieve it. We crave prosperity, and yes, some people manage to be prosperous, but even the wealthy turn out to just want more in many cases, and so that doesn't seem to satisfy people either. But now, he says, eliminating desire can eliminate suffering. By the way, one thing that Buddhists have as a very general claim about pleasure is that even when you do get what you want, the pleasure you derive from that is transitory. It doesn't last very long. It's highly vulnerable. And so even the person who has money worries about losing it and is likely to lose it. And so there are ways of achieving pleasure that, well, yes, you've achieved that pleasure, but it doesn't tend to last very long. A stupid, simple example. Think about an ice cream cone, okay? You think, ooh, that sounds good. I would like an ice cream cone. That would taste wonderful. And think of that first layer. I don't know, Rocky Road, or whatever your favorite flavor is, right? You think about that first layer. Oh, that tastes great. the second lick, it doesn't taste quite as good, right? You're getting a little used to it. By the time you're almost finished with the cone, it still tastes good, but it's not like that first thing. It's sort of, and now you're aware, oh, the cone is almost gone. And then as you finish the cone, it's like, oh, no more ice cream. and so it's a temporary pleasure, and you might say our ability to feel pleasure starts declining the more and more we have it, and we take it more and more for granted. Anyway, how do we get rid of this? We get rid of those desires. This, O monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It ceases with the complete cessation of craving, a cessation which consists in the absence of every passion, with the abandoning of this craving, with doing away with it, with the deliverance from it, with the destruction of desire. So we can eliminate suffering by eliminating the craving, eliminating coveting, eliminating desire. But now, how do we do that? Well, here he says, I do have a prescription for you. I have a course of therapy. It's the Eightfold Noble Path. The middle way is what he also calls this. And it's the way to eliminate this selfish desire that leads to suffering. It consists of 8 things: practicing right thought, right intention, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right meditation. And it really is meant to be something like an 8-step program. You don't do all of these at once. You don't jump ahead to the meditation part. You really have to engage each part in turn. Now, that's not to say you have to complete one before moving on to the other. It may be impossible to complete, well, I shouldn't say impossible, but it's very difficult to completely achieve any of these. Nevertheless, you have to practice them in a kind of order. You cannot assume that you will act correctly, for example, and practice right conduct, unless you're already practicing right thought, right intention, right speech. So how does this go? Let's start with right thought. In the Dhammapada, one of the basic texts of Buddhism, the Buddha says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. That's something that gets repeated throughout the entire work. Again and again, it says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. It's founded on our thoughts. It's made up of our thoughts. Now, what are these thoughts? That is to say, what really do we have to do to engage right thinking? Well, first of all, you have to know the Four Noble Truths. That is to say, you can't really follow through on the prescription unless you understand the diagnosis, unless you understand your condition. But it's not enough to just know the Four Noble Truths. You've got to avoid all harmful thoughts. And so the Buddha says, I want you to imagine, I want you to try, actually, for 1 minute to not have any harmful thoughts, to not have any negative thoughts. No thoughts about what you desire, about what you want. No negative thoughts about anyone else. No negative thoughts about yourself. Just purely positive thoughts for an entire minute. Can you do it? A number of you are shaking your heads no already. Gosh, I haven't even put you to the test. And I could do that actually now and just say, we're going to pause for 1 minute and let you think. But I think most of you can tell already, that's actually pretty hard. He said, if you find you can do it for a minute, try doing it for 2 minutes. Try doing it for 5 minutes. Try doing it for a whole hour. If you can do that, try to do it for an entire day. It is going to be incredibly difficult to do. Yes?
Can I ask a dumb question?
Sure.
Would working towards the Eight Gold Notebook, would that count as desire, since you're wanting to do this?
Ooh, that's not a dumb question at all. That's a very deep question. After all, you might say, wait a minute. I don't understand. I want to eliminate suffering. So I want to avoid desire. I want to eliminate desire. But isn't that kind of a contradiction? I desire not to desire. I mean, that's kind of strange, isn't it? It's kind of like saying, I want not to think about this. And it's like, ooh, as soon as I say it, I'm thinking about it. So there's something weird about that. Now, at one point, the Buddha does say, look, it is not just the craving for existence that gets us into trouble. It is also the craving for non-existence. It is also the craving to actually follow the Eightfold Noble Path. It is also the craving to display in your living the Four Noble Truths. And so there is indeed a way of following Buddhism that just traps you back in suffering by giving you that desire. So you have to, in some way, do this without craving to do it. And initially, that's going to be impossible, because it's going to take a tremendous amount of effort, initially, to actually put negative thoughts out of your head, even for a minute. And so, yes, initially you're going to be trapped in this. But your goal is ultimately to live a life of non-attachment, not being attached even to the Buddha, even to the Four Noble Truths, even to the Eightfold Noble Path. Yeah?
So is it avoiding, like, when you know you're having a bad thought, just ignore it, or is it fixing it and acknowledging that it is a bad thought?
All right, you're asking a hard question about how do you get rid of this negative thinking. Suppose you find a negative thought creeping into your mind. What should you do with it? Well, here's one approach. Ignore it, right? Distract yourself. Start thinking about something else. Here's another. Confront it. Realize, I'm thinking a negative thought. Why am I thinking that negative thought? Now, both of those can be useful techniques. It really depends what the negative thought is. Suppose the negative thought is, I'm hungry. I'm really hungry. Okay, I didn't have a chance to eat lunch, and I'm starving, man. And it's starting to distract you and bug you. Maybe the best thing to do there is to push it out of your mind, because to the extent that you think about it, that's not going to help. But other kinds of thoughts, no, you really have to work through. For example, suppose you find yourself constantly in competition with other people, or thinking negative thoughts about other people. Pushing them out of your head might not work. They might keep coming back because there's a reason that isn't just a physical reason. And so in that case, it's best to confront them and say, all right, why am I thinking this negative thought? Why is my heart filled with hate toward that person? Or at least toward it with annoyance or with something negative toward that person? And then try to sort out the reason why. So I don't think there's a uniform answer. It really depends on what this negative thought is.
So for the Buddha, the Buddhism, is it both, or is it the avoiding?
Oh, well, it's really avoiding. In the end, what you want to do is eliminate attachments. And by eliminating attachments, you will eliminate these negative thoughts. But the path to eliminating attachments is tricky. There are different paths that people have used and different stages by which we can achieve this. So near the end, I'll talk about the Zen circle. And what you have to do depends on the path, part of the path you're on, really. So initially, for example, you might just have to distract yourself. Eventually, you're going to have to confront it. Then you're going to have to substitute positive thoughts. In fact, a psychologist friend of mine stresses that it's very hard to get rid of a bad habit. What the best thing to do is not try to eliminate it, but instead try to substitute something else for it. You get home after a day and you want a beer, you're trying to give up that habit, have a Tootsie Pop instead. If you just try to have nothing, it'll be very difficult. But if you have a Tootsie Pop, maybe that'll be a sufficient substitute for the beer. And so that's the kind of thing you might have to do with thinking as well. You want to get rid of that negative thought. Substitute some other positive thought for it. Yeah?
Could a third thing be like, well, I'm thinking about some negative stuff in my life right now. Could I try to think, well, there's a way to resolve this, and like try to think of the good ways to resolve things and
Absolutely.
work around them? Would that be a positive thought?
That's right. Take a problem, take a negative thing, and turn it around into something positive in that way. Find a solution. Now, one way of looking at this is to say, look, Buddhism is really kind of antithetical to progress, because if you have a desire, don't try to fulfill it. Instead, just try to eliminate the desire. And so you might think, gosh, that's a recipe for not going anywhere. Thomas Edison says, wouldn't it be great if we had an electric light bulb? Whereas the Buddhist might say, eliminate that desire for an electric light bulb, instead do without it. But I think the better way of looking at this is what you're suggesting here. Take the negative thought and try to turn it into a positive one. And that may well involve doing this. For example, suppose you're really hungry. The idea isn't to give up all desires and follow the path of renunciation and give up food, let's say, except for that one bean a day. What's the line from The Devil Wears Prada? My diet is I wait until I'm about to pass out and then eat a cube of cheese. That's not really what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to, in some cases, confront the problem and solve the problem. Like, you're hungry, well, fine, have something to eat, and so on. So it's not like eliminating all desire. There's a special sort of desire that is described here as something like, the translators vary. Sometimes it's called craving, sometimes it's selfish desire. I think it would not be too far from the idea to express this as coveting. And the thought that, although that implies something sort of like, jealousy, envy of something else, and here it's more general than that. It doesn't have to be something that belongs to someone else. But the thought really is that not all desire is bad, but there is a certain kind of desire that causes suffering. If you think, gosh, I'm hungry, I want something to eat, and you eat something, that's not negative, that's not causing suffering. But there are all sorts of desires that do cause suffering. Now, however we try to do this, substitute good thoughts for bad thoughts, substitute thoughts about how to solve a problem for just obsession on the problem, we're going to have to try to eliminate these negative thoughts. And we will have to learn to become better and better at doing that. Yeah?
No, it's just for this.
Oh, well, yes, right. Now, here are some of the things the Buddha says to try to help us with this. As an archer makes his arrow straight, so a wise man makes straight his trembling and unsteady thought, which is difficult to guard and difficult to hold back. It's good to tame the mind, which is difficult to hold in and flighty. Rushing wherever it wishes, a tamed mind brings happiness. Excuse me, this is like too loud and keeps freaking out. There. Let the wise man guard his thoughts, for they're difficult to perceive, very artful. They rush wherever they wish. Thoughts well guarded bring happiness. So the idea is most of us have a kind of dissipation of mind. Our minds jump here and there, they jump all over the place. We go to negative thoughts whether we want to or not. And so the general idea, whatever strategy we end up using, is to get the mind more disciplined so that we can focus on the things we want to focus on and avoid all these negative thoughts that cause harm. What about right intention? Well, we have to intend to do the right thing. So we've got to try to eliminate selfish desire. There is no satisfying desires, even by a shower of gold pieces. He who knows that desires have a short taste and cause pain, he is wise. There is no fire like passion. There is no losing throw like hatred. There is no pain like this body. There is no happiness higher than stillness. So the image here is that all sorts of things that perturb the mind are really negative things. They're harmful. Fire, like passion. No losing throw, like hatred. Hatred is something that harms you more than it harms the person you hate. And so in the end, all of these are losing throws. All of them are negative. They're going to end up losing. And so what do we have to do? It's a bit like ancient skepticism. What you're really after is tranquility, peace of mind, stillness. And that's the highest happiness. That's what you're trying to achieve. All of these other things that disturb the mind are pulling you away from that and keeping you from intending to do the right sort of thing. Yeah?
Are these numbers like from a specific text?
Oh yeah, these are sections from the Dhammapada. So the numbers there are the numbered sections. Right speech is the third part. You've got to say the right sort of things. You've got to bring your, well, ideally by now you've started mastering your thoughts, so your speech has to go along with that. You have to not say negative things. So he says, don't speak harshly to anybody. Those who are spoken to will answer you in the same way. Angry speech is painful. Blows for blows will touch you. If like a shattered gong you make no utterance, then you have reached nirvana. Strife is not known to you. So you have to say only positive things. Now think about that for a moment. You might think, gosh, I don't say negative things. But you probably do. What are some examples of negative things that we all say? Yeah.
According to the Buddhist tradition, probably complaints.
Okay, good, complaints. I mean, how many times do you complain about things? God, I don't know. If you're like me, a lot. I sort of think, I excel at some things, but one of them is complaining. And I like to tell myself, well, I'm just very good at spotting problems early. Easier to solve them, right, when they're small, as the Taoist says. And so, yes, I am sort of a follower of the Tao Te Ching. I am always on the alert for small problems. But actually, the Buddha would say, yeah, you're complaining, okay? Yesterday, I was at a budget meeting. And you want to hear complaining? Wow, okay? When times are good, it's like, oh, yes, what do we do with all this money? And when times are bad, it's like, we've got to cut all this money from the budget. How does that happen? And so there's lots of complaining. But that's something that is one way in which we say negative things. What are some others?
Criticize ourselves negatively.
Oh, we might criticize ourselves, right? Some of that is said openly, but a lot of it is thought internally. We think all sorts of negative things about ourselves. And the Buddha is saying, look, that's harmful. Stop it. You might think, gosh, I'm too this, I'm too that. That's not the way you approach it. Instead, think positive thoughts about yourself. Think positive thoughts about other people. Try to eliminate those negative thoughts. Other things that you might say that are negative, that are harmful. Yeah?
Sometimes a lot of jokes that are sarcastic, making fun of people a lot, like, memes or somebody.
Okay, good. Making fun of people. And that, yes, I'm glad you mentioned memes, because it seems to me this has increased radically during the past few years as a result of Facebook and Twitter and things like that let people do this anonymously. It used to be that if somebody hated me and had something negative to say about me, they'd only, they'd have to say it to my face. Now, people can say it as a comment on my YouTube channel, or they can say it, as a nasty comment on Facebook, and so on and so forth. Or sometimes I just get these hate emails. It's really quite amazing. And some of them are very short. But one of my favorites is just, "You are stupid, professor," with no punctuation whatever. And so I, of course, being the professor, think, wait, do you mean you are stupid, professor? Or do you mean you are stupid, professor? Anyway, I don't know. But some are very short, then some are very long. One guy sent me these 3 very, very long emails basically saying I was an idiot and deserved to be fired and so forth.
What?
And so, these things happen in life. I mean, you've probably seen negative comments about you on Facebook, right? You say something and somebody says something snide or nasty in response to a comment you made. So there's lots of things that people can say that are hurtful. Some of them are intended to be hurtful. Some of them might just be sort of, unintentionally hurtful. Now, right speech. So, part of this is telling the truth, facing the facts. He says, he who says what is not goes to hell. He who having done a thing says he hasn't done that thing also goes to hell. After death, both are equal. They are men with evil deeds in the next world. So, lying, and in particular lying about what you've done, that's something that is serious. That is something that is a serious bit of harmful speech because it denies reality, because it denies the way things are. It misleads other people, but it also misleads you. Now, what about right conduct, right action? Here, the main rule is just avoid harming others. Don't do harmful things. And if you want to do that, you really do need to eliminate harmful thoughts, eliminate harmful speech, eliminate harmful intentions. Only then can you have a hope to really eliminate harmful actions. And in particular, you need to obey the 5 restraints. What are the 5 basic ethical restraints in Buddhism? Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie, do not be unchaste, and do not ingest intoxicants. Okay? The last one is not one that is found in most religious traditions, but it is fundamental to Buddhism. Now, why is ingesting intoxicants bad?
Because it denies reality.
Ooh, there's one possible explanation. It denies reality. When you're drunk, do you see the world the way it is? All too often, no. Right? Everybody gets better looking when you're drunk for one thing. But it's not just that. I mean, you misperceive all sorts of things.
Become addicted, which is a kind of very strong desire.
Ooh, you can become addicted, and that's an incredibly strong desire. Yeah, you want to talk about craving. And so anything that is potentially addictive is really taking the risk of inducing this major craving within yourself. Other explanations, yeah. Okay, good. It interferes with right thinking, right conduct. It increases desire. It is something that confuses the mind, and so it makes it much harder to think correctly, to intend correctly, to speak correctly, and so on. So it's a way of basically encouraging the worst and lowering your guard, preventing you from engaging in the proper management of your own thought and speech and conduct. Now, right livelihood. It's not just that you have to act well today and tomorrow. There's a huge amount of ethical significance that goes into the choice of a career. Some careers are going to put you in a position of doing ethical things routinely. Other careers are going to put you in a position of doing unethical things. And so you need to have a career that encourages you toward a path of right action, not a path of wrong action. You've got to choose the right sort of career. And in particular, you've got to avoid anything that requires you or even tempts you to harm other people. So, what are some professions, you might think, that the Buddhists would find unacceptable professions? Yeah. Good. The mafia, right? Okay. Yeah. What's your job? Well, I'm a hitman. Okay, I go. Vito tells me who to rub out, I rub him out. Yeah, that's clearly unacceptable from a Buddhist point of view. What are some others? Yes.
Being a lawyer.
Being a lawyer. Ooh. Now, why do you say that?
You can really ruin people's lives sometimes. You can.
That.
It depends on each case, right? It's kind of have the stereotype of like being scummy.
Right. Well, okay. Being a lawyer is actually a really dangerous thing from a Buddhist point of view. Why? Because you've got to argue a side of the case, whether or not it's true. Your job isn't actually to find out the truth. It is instead to present the argument on one side. And if that isn't necessarily an unethical thing to do, but boy, is it a temptation. Because you are in a position where you're really not trying to match your rhetoric to reality. You're trying to convince someone whether or not your client is guilty, whether or not they are actually liable for those damages and so on. And so I think, at least I haven't seen in Buddhism the practice of law being something that's absolutely prohibited, but it's something that is a huge danger. It would be very difficult to be a good Buddhist and be a lawyer. Yeah?
I'm a comedian.
A comedian? Oh, it depends on the kind of comedian. But yes, I mean, if you're a Steve Martin kind of comedian whose comedy is having an arrow go through your head and dancing around like an idiot, that might be okay, but so many comics depend on cynical, negative remarks about other people, making fun of other people. Almost all late-night comics now seem to be just depend on negative humor, sarcasm, and things like that. And indeed, that would all be prohibited. Yeah?
Military.
Ooh, being in the military. What about that? Is that something that would be acceptable?
Absolutely.
It depends actually on your role. Something that the Buddha says at one point is, there's a huge difference between the maker of arrows and the maker of shields. The maker of shields is trying to protect people. The maker of arrows is trying to harm them. Now, I've had a lot of people respond, but wait a minute, the maker of arrows is making them so that the person won't attack you. And so there's a defensive point even to offensive arms. But at least this question of the military, of weapons making and so on, all of that is at least questionable from a Buddhist point of view. Yeah?
Advertising?
Advertising. Oh, it depends. There would be an ethical way of doing it, namely to present the actual facts of your product. But there would certainly be an unethical way of doing it, where it becomes manipulative or in any way deceptive. Yeah?
CEO,
Being a CEO. Now, why would that be bad?
because you're exploiting others. You're potentially, running sweatshops. Kids are working. You're desiring more income. You're, undercutting others. It's very snide, cynical, exploitative game.
Well, it could be. So if you run a certain kind of company that's highly exploitative, yes, that could be problematic. On the other hand, just having a business is not something that the Buddha would consider unacceptable. I mean, not all businesses are exploitative, not all businesses harm people and so on. However, he does list caravan trading as among the things to be avoided. Now, what's wrong with caravan trading? Why is that particular business something that would be problematic? Because you don't have a fixed address, and he thinks that means you're going to have a terrible temptation to cheat your customers. If you're in a long-term relationship with people in business, then you've got actually a strong incentive to treat them fairly. But if you're not, if you're a sort of fly-by-night operation, then you've got a strong incentive to treat them unfairly. And so, again, it's not like the caravan trader is necessarily doing something wrong, but the temptation is huge to do something wrong. Yeah?
Directing films like Quentin Tarantino films.
Directing films, well, again, it depends what the film is. If you're somebody like Miyazaki making Spirited Away, which is actually, I think, a wonderful exposition of basic tenets of Buddhism, then it might be great. But if you're making something like a Quentin Tarantino film involving lots of violence, encouraging negative thoughts and so on, then it would be very bad. Well, right effort. You need to do something that is difficult here, trying to eliminate negative thinking, eliminate desire and so on, so it requires a tremendous amount of effort. It says you've got to be like the ox, constantly struggling to avoid selfish desire. It is a very, very difficult thing to do. And then finally, right concentration. Oh, go ahead.
So for right effort, wouldn't you need to use right effort in order to do right thought? Like you need to exert the right effort in order to accomplish the right thought?
Actually, you do. So when I said that you have to do these things more or less in order, this is one that feels like it's required for every one of the ones above and below. So that's a good point. That's an exception. In fact, yeah, right effort is really, it's sort of global. It's required for right speech, right thought, right intention, right action, right livelihood. It's required for the whole shebang. And it's going to be required for meditation too. Because when we get to the last two, right concentration and then right meditation, this is very difficult. You've got to develop mental powers to push certain things out of your mind, to focus, to concentrate, to bind the mind to a single spot. And then you've actually got to get the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. You've got to get stillness of mind. And when you do that, you will illuminate the object as it actually is. Which is to say, empty. You're going to empty it of what you normally think of it as, and so it will turn out that a basic truth of the universe is revealed to you. That, as the Buddhists put it, the dharmas are empty. The objects of the world are empty. They have no character of their own. Well, there are two kinds of Buddhism and two kinds of moral ideals. Theravada Buddhism, which takes as a set of early writings as its basic canon, is popular in Southeast Asia. Its ideal is the arhat, that is to say the saint, the person who is the monk, who dedicates him or herself to meditation, to concentration. It's very much an individual project to try to achieve the state of mind, the enlightenment that will enable you to overcome desire. The other kind is known as Mahayana Buddhism. That's popular in China and Japan. It takes a different canon of writings and many later writings as part of its sacred scriptures. And its ideal is the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is someone who postpones his or her own enlightenment to help others on the path to enlightenment. So, the Arhat is the saint who achieves enlightenment and experiences nirvana, thereby eliminating desire. The chief virtue of the Arhat is wisdom. And so, of that tradition, the chief Buddhist virtue is really wisdom. The wisdom to be able to exert this kind of mental control. In the other, however, it's really compassion, because the Bodhisattva is somebody who does postpone enlightenment to promote the enlightenment of others. There's a story that people are going through the desert, about to die. They finally find an oasis. At least it looks like an oasis, but they're not sure whether there's anything there or not. There's a wall. One of them says, I'll climb up and go over the wall and see what's there, see if there's water, see if there is anyone hostile. So that person does that. He says, I'll report back, but he doesn't come back. The second does the same. The third does the same. And finally, the fourth climbs up the wall, looks in, sees that there is indeed water, sees that it is an oasis, and then turns back and says, I'm going to go out back into the desert to try to help other travelers find this place. So, here are the 6 perfections there. It involves compassion, charity, a good moral character involving concern for others, as well as patience. Now, I am myself impatient to get to the most fun part, because I want to talk a little bit about Zen. So, the key to enlightenment on all these Buddhist traditions is non-attachment. Look upon the world as a bubble, says the Buddha. Look upon it as a mirage. The king of death does not see him who thus looks down upon the world. Come, look at this glittering world like a royal chariot. The foolish are immersed in it, but the wise do not touch it. So, don't identify yourself with name and form, but instead see things as empty. Well, there are arguments for both the Arhat and the Bodhisattva ideal. It's all ultimately about enlightenment. But on the other hand, if you seek just your own enlightenment, it suggests you're attached to your own welfare. Let's talk for a couple of minutes at the end here about Zen. Zen is a view that differs from mainstream schools of Buddhism in that it stresses sudden enlightenment. The idea is that the Buddha nature is everywhere, and anything could bring about its realization. It's not necessarily the product of years of training and hard effort. It's something that can be brought about in a very sudden sort of fashion, and in a surprising way. So the idea here is that the mind is simple. It is a unity, and it can achieve enlightenment very suddenly. So, how does that go? Well, Zen theses aren't really descriptive. They are trying to bring out a state of mind, this heightened sense of reality. And there are different ways of doing that, including koan, these puzzles like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or, well, how did your face look before your ancestors were born? Or what direction does the 12 statue face? Here's one of my favorites. A cow passes by the window. The horns, head, and 4 legs pass by. Why doesn't the tail pass by? A man kept a goose in a bottle. It grew larger and larger until he couldn't get out. He didn't want to hurt the goose. He didn't want to break the bottle. How can he get it out? And here are statements. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Moo is the answer. What is the Buddha nature? 3 pounds of flax. Okay, now, the idea is this. Thinking involves discrimination and it leads to suffering. The Buddha's flower sermon is one that involves no words at all. It is said that he simply held up a flower and smiled. I don't have a flower, but he does just smile. So here is the entire text of the flower sermon. Now, the idea is really that expresses a message beyond the scriptures. And indeed, Yishuan, Master Rinzai, the founder of Zen, uses all sorts of things, shouts, beatings, to bring about enlightenment. So here are some stories. A monk asked, what's the basic idea of the law preached by the Buddha? The master shouted at him, and there's a very characteristic Zen shout. Ha! Okay. Now, the monk paid reference. The master said, the master and the monk can argue, all right. Master, whose tune are you singing? Whose tradition are you perpetuating? He said, when I was a disciple of Huang Po, I asked him 3 times, and I was beaten 3 times. The monk hesitated about what to say. The master shouted at him and beat him, saying, don't nail a stick into empty space. And beating, they mean literally. I mean, if I were a Zen master teaching you the way Master Yishuan did, I would be hitting you with sticks. Now, the master ascended the hall. A monk asked, what is the basic idea of the law preached by the Buddha? The master lifted up his swatter. The monk shouted, and the master beat him. The monk asked again, what's the basic idea of the law preached by the Buddha? The master again lifted up his swatter. The monk shouted, and the master shouted also. As the monk hesitated about what to say, the master beat him. Okay. Now, here's one of my favorites. He says, once I was at Huang Po's place for 20 years, and 3 times I asked him about the basic idea of the law preached by the Buddha, and 3 times I was beaten. But I felt that I was only struck by a dried stalk. Now I desire a real beating. Who can give it to me? One monk came out and said, I can do it. The master picked up the staff to give him, and he was about to take it. The master beat him. Okay. Now, one of his main theses is that dharmas are empty. Everything is really empty. Nothing has any essence of its own, so seek after nothing. In the end, the entire world is really like a dream, an illusion, flowers in the air. In other words, idealism, he thinks, is essential to actually giving up desire. And so there is a message here that goes beyond the scriptures. It involves really getting beyond attachment to yourself, to anything in this world, and it helps to think of it all as an illusion, as a construction of the mind.